so I have to consent to recording is what the device requires nowadays.
All right. Well, welcome to Conversations with Keyshawn and Alexandra. We're two longtime friends with a tendency toward reflective, thought-provoking conversation. Sometimes our conversations are random, and other times, like now, we reflect based on themes in media. Today, we are talking about Queen Sugar, Season 6, Episode 1, If You Could Enter Their Dreaming. So, Keyshawn, how long have you been watching Queen Sugar?
I was a late bloomer to the show. I didn't start watching Queen Sugar until I would say like the spring of 2019. And so I had a couple seasons to catch up on so I can kind of like get on board. I didn't have cable TV for years. So OWN was just something I did not own, nor did I have access to. And I just heard a lot about the show and was curious about it because it's, you know, it takes place just outside of New Orleans in an imaginary place, of course, but just outside of New Orleans. So a lot of the cultural references were interesting to me. So I basically binged the first two seasons so that I could catch up in time just before I want to say season 3 was starting. So I'm caught up now, but I definitely didn't get on board right away when everybody else did.
That's a
How
good
about you?
point. I also have typically not had access to cable, like even if I think about my childhood. So initially, I would have thought to say like, "Oh, I've been watching it from the beginning," and it's like,
Right.
no, yes, you've watched all the episodes, but you did not start like
Exactly.
everybody else started. Um, at first I was watching on Hulu, and they tend to not release the season until it's completely finished, I want to say.
Mm-hmm.
But I
Mm-hmm.
had definitely heard about it and I was looking forward to it. So when I saw that it was available, I definitely was like, oh, let me get on that. And then
Right.
you know how it is when you I'm typically not like a full binger, but when you do
Okay.
have something that is available whole season at once, and even if you're not all in one night binging, but you don't have to wait a full week to, see the next episode,
Right.
when you finish, it's like, wait. Where
It's interesting because I think streaming has created that craving that comes with binging because, you know, not a very long time ago, I would say even a decade ago, there were some of, our favorite shows that we watched that we just knew Thursday night, 8 o'clock, we just had to be in front of our TV. And if we missed it, we just missed it.
right.
That was it. There was no watch it later unless you had like DVR or on demand or something like that. You just kind of missed it. So now it's kind of like we've been conditioned to expect to be able to get the whole story in one 8-hour sitting,
Mhm.
whereas that's not how TV always was.
Right.
So,
It's similar with Insecure, actually. Um I watched it with a friend, and once I found out how I could also access it, because particularly because that's a 30-minute show. So yeah, you watch the whole season in one sitting, and then particularly because with HBO shows, ain't no telling when the next season is coming. So uh
right.
look, let me not get into a whole conversation about that, but it's coming back in October, so that might be.
I know. And the final season too. That's
Yes.
it.
So, speaking of final seasons, this is going to be the final season of Queen Sugar. So, that's definitely something bittersweet for sure. What has kept you watching? Oh,
What's
wait, did
kept
I
me
even finish?
watching? Yeah, no, I was gonna say, well, what's kept me watching? Um, it's interesting because a part of me feels like initially what kept me watching was just curiosity. Like, why is this such a popular show? Why is it such a big deal? The fact that it's on OWN says a lot, as far as like selecting specific programming that's going to be on Oprah's,
Right.
channel. What kept me watching initially was the family dynamic, being part of a big family and the whole sisters and like the baby brother character. I have 4 siblings. There's 4 girls. I mean, 3 siblings, four siblings. There's 4 girls and 1 boy. And my brother is the baby. His birthday was actually just yesterday. So like some of the dynamics between Charlie and Nova and Ralph Angel literally mirror conversations, with the exception of the context. We're not talking about land because we don't have that just
Right.
yet. But some of the dynamics of the relationship between the siblings is like, yep, yep, accurate. So I like that. You know, I like shows that are family shows that are actually well written, realistic, and show true family dynamics. Even when they have drama, they don't fall apart permanently. And that was something that was really valuable to me to see. So initially, that's what kept me watching. And then now, knowing that it's kind of following what I think is a trend in TV shows right now, where they're ending at the sixth season. I
Hmm.
don't know what it is about six. It used to be let's get to 10, with the exception of shows on ABC that last 100 years, like
Right.
shows that we watch, medical drama,
Child.
which we'll talk about some other time, which will never end, apparently. But these shows, like I know like Schitt's Creek, This Is Us, there's a couple other shows, family shows that are like season 6, we're done. So yeah, that's what's kept me watching so far. How about you? What's
That's
kept you in
interesting
it?
too when you point out six, because as we know, like six is a significant cyclical number. So there
Mhm.
could be that could be a contributing factor too. I
Right.
also, so I don't have a large, raised in the house family. I have a
Mhm.
large extended family. So I am always fascinated by um just depictions of family dynamics because I was
Right.
raised as an only child. So, like, the
Mhm.
concept of having siblings is something that, I'm always very interested in. Of course, having like a Black cast, that's, amazing. So, that is probably why I wanted to check it out so badly. And then once I started watching it,
Mhm.
the fact that there's like a queer character, uh, openly queer, I would even say. um I appreciate, what I really appreciate is the way her queerness is depicted. it she is she is a person who ebbs and flows in her attractions, which
Mhm.
is something I can relate to. And
Mhm.
you don't see that so much on TV. It's
Mhm.
like coming out, making this declaration. You have to pick, what you like. And then
Right.
you have like, it's this whole thing. And with Nova, she's into who she's into, and it's not
Mhm.
like a big thing. And
Right.
because that is, again, something I can relate to, it's something I appreciate.
Right.
Also, I love the intergenerational
Mhm.
aspect.
Mhm.
And then also being raised in California and now living in Texas, which is the South to a degree.
It's the
Um,
South.
in so many ways. But
In so many ways.
so it's also very interesting. And I'll, circle, I definitely have some kind of ways that that's going to come up too when we
Mhm.
start really talking about some of the characters and the storylines. And then before we get into like tonight, how did you feel about last season, which wasn't that long ago?
Yeah, last season seems like it was just like 3 months ago. But I mean, by the time that I finished watching it, like I still maybe habitually, the show usually airs Tuesday nights. I usually watch it on Wednesdays because I don't like commercials. And so, but then sometimes when I watch it on demand, there's still commercials. But that's typically, I like to kind of like sit down and really get into it. Last season, last season was tricky because I feel like a lot of shows across the board either chose to make an entire episode, I'm sorry, an entire season dedicated to the pandemic and how it affected the world that exists within the television show. And I feel like other shows chose to kind of almost ignore it in a sense, or make it just like an afterthought. Like maybe you would see somebody wearing a mask, maybe you would hear somebody talking about, their lifestyle changing or something like that. But like a show like Grownish, for instance, yes, they addressed the pandemic, but they more so focused on the racial injustice and uprising, versus a show like Grey's Anatomy. It's a medical show. All they talk about was the freaking pandemic. So Queen Sugar, I feel like took a little bit of both and wove them together, where of course they address the racial injustice, of course they address George Floyd, they did an entire episode, say their names, like that was deep. And I think also in the midst of that, they did their best to give us some joy with the Ralph Angel and Darla like wedding. So
Right.
I feel like that was their way of being like, look, we know it's been a hell of a year, y'all. So here's some joy.
Right.
Wedding, baby,
Right.
okay. It's
And
not all
then,
sad, you know?
right. And I think too, one of the things about last season, especially given the timing, um, I want to say it aired in the early parts of 2021, and the way it was structured was, that like reflection on 2020. Each episode
Mhm.
represented a month. And so, because I mean, and really even now we're still in the thick of all of this, right? But at that point, it's like, oh, whew, we survived 2020.
Right.
And so it was the it was handled in a very graceful, tasteful way, I would say,
Mhm. Mhm.
but it was absolutely challenging to be made to revisit those points in time, because particularly because we're still in the midst of it, right? So it's like looking at the January and the February depictions when there was still that optimism, and even when businesses started to close, it was, oh, we'll be back in 2 weeks. And it's like, it was like remembering like, oh man, we were so like naive then.
We had no clue. It's like watching Titanic, like, y'all gonna die. Everybody on this boat gonna die. You know what I mean? But it's like Titanic, we weren't there. It was hundreds of years ago. This was just 12 months ago. And like you
Right.
said, in a lot of ways, we're still in the thick of it. Not only the pandemic, but also the racial injustice, also the political change, the climate, physical climate change. Like there's still so many pieces of it that are still very real that, and I think that's part of the reason why some shows, again, chose to kind of like address it, but not get into it
Right.
versus Queen Sugar's like, this is a black show. We're gonna talk about black shit. We're gonna talk about what's really happening. We're gonna talk about
Right.
what's going on in our community. And we're gonna make people really uncomfortable, and including black folks who are watching it who might feel triggered, or like you said, having to go back and revisit those feelings for some who were still very much in those feelings, especially people who live in certain regions of the country. So, oh yeah, most definitely. It was hard to watch. I had to watch it, but it was hard to watch.
Yes, yes. All right. So, dear viewer, as you might have gathered, we are not necessarily going to recap scene by scene, because in theory, if you're here, you already watched the episode. So
You
I
don't
know,
need us to reenact it for you.
right. But I know, like on my end, I I would like to talk about some of the themes that came up for me with some of the different characters. At first, I was going to do it like in order, but then I was like, well, no, if I'm going to talk about like Charlie, for example, let me just go ahead and, highlight some of that. Does that work for you, ma'am?
That's fine. Yeah, that works for me.
Perfect. All
I was
right.
like, unless we go in alphabetical order, but Charlie would still be first.
Right. And then too, of course, that the whole thing is that everyone's story is connected, which is really what the show
Hmm.
is about, right?
Right.
So while it's easy to zoom in on the borderlines, obviously the relationships they have with other members in the community and with
Hmm.
their partners, it comes into play. So speaking of Charlie, she was one of the first people we saw, and um, for me, she kind of brought up a lot of things, because in the beginning, we see her with Davis, who at first I was like, what is his name? I was like, it's not West, that's their last name. And I was like, I don't want to be calling him Micah's daddy, but eventually they said it.
He
Oh, it's
does have a
Davis,
name.
that's right.
He has a, I say that he's a character who has a last name as a first name.
Right.
Because I often think of Davis as a last name versus I think of David as a first name, but like one of my mom's good friends, her last name is Davis, and I know a
Right.
lot of people Davis, but yeah,
Yeah, most of the instances of Davis I've seen are definitely last names. And then,
last names, right?
right. So yeah, and then, well, ciao. Don't get me started. So forgiveness, right? And that was even when I was watching the, last season on Queen Sugar, was thinking
Mhm.
about forgiveness. Is it, people talk about like forgive and forget and all that kind of stuff. Is forgiveness possible? What does it even mean to forgive?
It's interesting that you highlight forgiveness as a theme of the show
Well,
overall.
well,
I would say, and no, as when you said it, I was like, oh no, forgiveness is a theme of the show
that's true.
overall.
That's true.
Because you have Charlie, Charlie's incidences with Davis, the asking for forgiveness there. And then you have Nova's incidences with writing the book, asking for forgiveness from the whole damn family.
Right.
And then you have, Ralph Angel asking for forgiveness from Aunt Vi for, having to take care of Blue. Then you have Darla asking Ralph Angel for forgiveness because of her shenanigans. And then you have, like, everybody be forgiving everybody all the time in this show. And I think that forgiveness is really what enables relationships to really be sustainable, because otherwise you're just kind of bonded only by blood, not by choice, especially when it comes to like familial relationships. I feel like forgiveness is almost a requirement in order to have any type of stability, any type of real, like, authentic connection. And because families are a breeding ground for conflict, because we're connected not necessarily by choice, by birth. And so I think that forgiveness I would say forgiveness is a theme of the show within that vein. But I feel like forgiveness is not about forgetfulness. Forgiveness is about acknowledgement and reform in a lot of ways, acknowledging flaw, acknowledging harm, done to another person, and then reforming the behavior so that you're not repetitively asking for forgiveness for the same thing over and over again. And I also think forgiveness is less about you, the person who's been wronged, like letting the other person off the hook, more so releasing yourself from like holding them in bondage for whatever they did wrong, and saying like, if you acknowledge the wrongdoing, then I have the choice to be able to release this and move on, especially if I intend on having a sustained relationship with you, especially in the family context, which in this show is pretty much what they all are.
And also when you think about, I'm definitely paraphrasing, but the example of, holding on to anger or resentment for someone
Mm-hmm.
else is like holding on to coal, like you're really hurting yourself. And
Right.
so, with that, um, if the relationship, if the apology, if the behavior or the changed behavior rather, um, warrants forgiveness,
Mm-hmm.
then it really it can be liberating for you, um
Right.
be, particularly if we want to zoom in on Charlie. This is the
Mm-hmm.
father of her child, um
Right.
and it's clear that there's still an attraction and a love there, because those are not necessarily the same, um
Right.
nor do they always accompany each other. So
Right.
I do think, and of course, I mean, he came in the clutch. So, that also went a very long way. And the fact that she knew that despite everything that had happened, she could count on him. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's why she reached out to him last season. And that's what kind of paved the way for her to forgive him. Um,
Right.
so she, despite, not wanting to be partnered with him, um, and all of that, she still understood that their connection was significant
Right.
and
Right.
worth, maybe not worth, she may not have known that it was worth reconsidering, but she
Yeah.
definitely knew that like, this is someone I can trust. I want to be discreet about this. I believe that he can do that as well, that
Right.
sort of thing.
Right.
So now they're like rekindling or renewing their relationship. And it's interesting to see, it seems like in his mind, he's like, oh, well, we're back on. Let's flip the switch. Like, boom, let's go. and she wants to take baby steps. When you're rekindling with someone you've been with before, especially someone you've been with for a long time, they were college sweethearts.
They were college sweethearts, yeah. So
So
they'd been together. If Micah is what, a
19,
sophomore in college, they've been together for at least 19 years,
right.
or they were, together at least 19, 15, 19 years ago. So yeah.
So it's like when you're rekindling with someone that you've been with so long, like,
Mm-hmm.
can you date? Because, now she's like, oh, well, let's tell the family that we're dating.
We're
Can
dating,
you date
right?
someone you've been married to for decade plus?
I mean, I would say Charlie's intention with that is to say, like, we're not back together. We're not married again. We're not just going to like revert back to being a married couple, like we never got divorced, like we never went through the things we went through. I think for her to say, like, tell the family that we're dating, and also a thing about big families is that they are often enmeshed in almost an unhealthy codependent way sometimes. It ain't really the family's business who you're dating, for one. But I think for her to say dating is a way for her to kind of like pump the brakes for him to understand, like, nah, bro, like, you destroyed our marriage. So if anybody needs to be taking the baby steps, it definitely needs to be you, versus her saying, yeah, let's just dive back in. And it's like, no. We're just going to start like messing around and maybe see if we can do that again. When in truth, that probably was never a problem for them to date. It was the being married part that was challenging, I think.
Well, and also, to your point about like it not being the family's business, I initially thought she was going to say, we need to tell Micah. I was
Micah,
kind
I
of
was
caught
thinking the
off guard when
same.
she said, we need to tell the family. I was like, oh, because when you're dating
Yeah,
someone from scratch, it's typically step by step, right? You don't like, unless you're me, then you bring the person to your family reunion.
right.
But normal folks, you meet one family member at a time, either like the closest family member, like a parent, or a sibling. Um, or it might be like a more distant relative, just so that they can feel like, oh, I met a family member, where it's really like a third cousin, or something.
Right. This is my babysitter from when I was 5. She's like family though. Here, you can meet Miss Johnson. You know what I'm saying? Like, yeah, that's different. But for them, no, I thought the same thing. I was like, oh, you're gonna tell Micah, yeah, good idea. Good parents, tell your son, who was probably the most traumatized by your divorce, that you guys are dating again. Let's start there.
Right.
But then from a TV standpoint, tell the whole family, so that Micah gets pissed off and mad at you guys for not telling him specifically, and
Oh,
not feeling like he had that special opportunity to find out before everybody else did, because that stirs the
right.
pot.
And two, not necessarily, well, no, a reflection on him specifically, but in general, um, the child of a rekindled couple might feel like they potentially have veto power, which is not necessarily the
Yes, that's exactly what they would feel. That's exactly what they would feel. Mm-hmm.
So
No,
yeah,
that's exactly.
if
I can
you
relate.
sit everybody down and he's in the room, because at this point it's unclear to me anyway if he's local,
Right.
but even if he's in the room, he
Mm-hmm.
might not feel as if he has as much leverage as if it was just the three of them in a room.
Exactly. Agreed. And I think also, as a person who has a child around Micah's age, I mean, in real life, I don't know how old the actor is, but in real life, around his age, I could only imagine what my son would say if he discovered that his dad and I, who've granted been divorced for quite some time, were dating. There's the part, I would say, that would probably, the little boy part would be like, oh my God, mommy and daddy are not fighting anymore. But the man part would be like, the fuck? But no, sir, no, ma'am. No, there are lots of fish in the sea, and y'all don't need to try to fish on each other anymore. Sit down, like, get it together. Yeah, yeah. Because of the trauma of the divorce. It's
Right,
like, so what if it doesn't work out? We got to go through this all over again? Like,
right.
no, thank you. I don't want to relive that. No, thanks.
That part, all of that. Yes.
Yeah.
And so like, they're at the little honeycomb hideout or whatever in California, which, put a pin in the fact that like most of their partnership was in California.
In California,
Um,
exactly.
so a part of me had that inkling when they mentioned that she was in California. I was like, oh, she with her boo. And
Hmm.
sure enough,
I
um,
mean, she might be going to hear Maxine Waters speak, but she's
but
making a tip.
also,
But
because
also, this
yeah,
is
she
also
was
happening.
there for a conference, but
She was,
also,
yeah. This and right, right,
um, so, and she's there for this conference because of her burgeoning political career. And now he's in a
hmm
position to be her cheerleader, which is a complete switch from what the dynamic of their relationship has historically been. So
right.
I found that very interesting. And also, because they are a heterosexual couple,
Hmm.
it's also like that switch too, right? Because I can't remember now if he's still in the league or not. Clearly, he's not like hurting for money or anything. But whatever the case
Right.
is, he might have retired. But
I feel like he transferred from LA to New Orleans so he could be like local.
mm,
And then, yeah, I don't know if he retired or if it was just kind of like, we don't care about him necessarily that much to really talk about it a whole lot. And then it was just like assumed that because of COVID, NBA pretty
sure,
much shut down.
sure.
So it was kind of just like grouped into that. I would say it kind of left to the viewer to assume he ain't playing basketball right now. So,
um, but yeah, so she's not well, she stopped managing him quite some time ago. And so now
right.
she's on this new career path and he's being her cheerleader. And even though what excuse me, you can also see, even though she's trying to play this cool role, she's also looking forward, right? Because she's asking him about um, a decision she's considering in terms of her career, right? What
Correct.
if I were
Right.
to dive deeper into politics? Because if we are to resume being a family, that'll affect him as well, right? So, yeah, all of that. But
And I
also,
think it's also a way for her to say, like, what do you think about that? And it's interesting because, in a sense, she still has to manage him. Even if she's not managing his career, she's managing her career because of him and because of their past. If she were to really like dive deeper into politics, he would have to be on his best behavior
right,
because anything he did would obviously affect her
mhm,
in a huge, huge way. So
right, right.
yeah.
And so, as they're in this like honeycomb hideout before she got to the part about, let's start telling people, it made me
Hmm.
think about the fine line between being secretive and being discreet.
Mm,
Like cognitively, we know there's a difference, but sometimes I struggle to describe it. So for me, secrets or secretive have like a negative connotation. Like,
hmm.
but why? how might you kind of try to like use words to describe the nuance between secretive,
I,
discreet?
you know, I feel like discretion is more, well, I guess they're technically both for the benefit of the people who are keeping the secret, but I feel like discretion is more of a general protection, like we're just going to use discretion, like need to know basis kind of thing, where it's almost like taking the responsibility away from anyone else to feel like they have to be held responsible for the information that they have access to or something like that.
Mhm.
Whereas something that's being kept secret feels like it's more about deception versus discretion.
Right,
Be,
right.
you know what I'm saying? Because
Yeah, I think,
discretion is kind of like,
yeah,
we don't need to tell nobody that there's a hole in the bottom of this pool, okay? So we just don't go on the deep end. We're just gonna not say anything. You know what I'm
right.
saying? Versus like a secret for the purpose of deception is like, oh yeah, the pool's great. It's wonderful. Go swim all over it, knowing that there's a hole in one end. You know, like it's kind of, it feels like one of those things where just intention is a big part of it. And
Yes.
so like for them, for Charlie and Davis, I feel like part of the attraction of their rekindling is the fact that it's a secret,
Mhm.
is the fact that there's a little bit of deception that's woven around it. She's lying to Micah about why she's really in California, what she's really doing, except Aunt Vi somehow kind of knows there's something going on between them because Aunt Vi is just psychic and she just knows everything.
He does.
So it feels like it's in the irony, and I might be reading way into this. This probably isn't even in the writer's room, but the irony of the fact that one of the reasons why, I would say the primary reason why Charlie and Davis's marriage ended is because he was unfaithful. It's like she's having an affair with her ex-husband now
But
because
also, I
yeah,
I would even kind of add on to that, because he was unfaithful without being discreet about it.
without being discreet about it. And the fact that it was more embarrassing to her because of the fact that she was the devoted wife and the whole thing. It's like, really? Really? You just want to drag my name through the street out here? I look like a fool, that kind of feeling. So it was more like shame versus even just like regular old, I'm mad because you
Right,
cheated.
right. And then, when you get into like the what wound up being the legal, like, or
Yeah.
the situation he was in that led to legal ramifications, like that was that's really what made it like, although at first she was still going to be
He
like,
was still going hard. Yeah.
right, like she was willing to pay somebody off
But
to,
that was for her benefit.
yeah, yeah,
That was to protect her image and her character. So
mhm,
it's like she would make a great politician,
right,
but she has all the characteristics of a great politician.
right.
She's deceptive.
And
She,
also too, it's good. I'm glad you pointed that out, because as we've seen her evolve, though, she's seemingly moved away from being that person in a lot of ways. But those are the types of traits we associate with a politician, which she now is. So will some of those traits possibly reemerge?
I don't feel like they ever really left. I think that her her behaviors are very reactionary. And so Charlie, I almost called her Charlie is constantly reacting. She's like one of the most I mean, they're all reactive. The Borderlones as a
Right.
family, and the children, I should say, they're all constantly reactive. And it's because they've been in survival mode for a certain period of their life. So the entire like character dynamic of them is that they're reacting to the world, they're reacting to each other, they're reacting to what's happening in their personal relationships versus responding and kind of like being mindful and sitting back. And even though some would say that Charlie's character is somewhat calculated because of the way that she approaches, life, I don't think that those characteristics go anywhere, especially when she feels like her hive or her family is under duress or being threatened in some kind of way.
Mhm.
So I feel like and also the oldest sibling kind of thing, she just like charges
Right.
at everyone. Like, otherwise she's gonna just kind of sit back and let it burn in a sense.
So
But
for
yeah, she's
the
all
for the folks who may not know, are you the oldest? I'm not going to say the
I
Charlie.
am the Charlie in my family.
Okay. I
I'm not
wasn't
an,
sure.
I'm, we're from, all five of us are from the same two parents. That's the only difference. That's really the only
Right,
difference
right.
between me and
That's
her. And yeah, there's definitely, and I would say I'm probably similar in that regard where like, I don't pull out that like truly, combative legal mind unless I absolutely have to. And I also want my siblings to feel empowered to kind of do their own thing. Just like she's like, come on, get it together. I'll be there to rescue you, but I don't want to have to all the time. But
mm-hmm,
yeah.
mm-hmm.
Speaking of being rescued, Ralph Angel.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. He's really been trying, because when we met him initially, right, he was fresh out the pen and trying to rebuild from there. And we know that our society doesn't really set people in that situation up for success.
Right.
And he had started to make some momentum once he really got into what it meant to, run a farm and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
So he, as an entrepreneur, he was
Mhm.
absolutely very hard hit by the events of
Yeah.
2020. And so it's like, yes, you get the highs of, he's also rekindled with Darla, and
Mhm.
they're married, and now they have this baby coming, which are like these highs. But then he has these lows of, that means even more expectations, especially being, a man, a black man raised in the South. So I'm sure he has all of these, you know, preconceived notions of what he's supposed to be doing as a man for his family.
Right.
Um, so, but in the context of his larger family, he's the baby. So there's that dynamic too. Um, uh but so like he's reaching the limits, he's bills are due, so there's those kind of limits of deadlines. He's requesting loans that he's being told like, this is the last time you can ask for this. um and again, new baby on the way, the stakes are high. Luckily with Blue's grandmother is paying for the schooling, so that's one less concern, one less demand. um but yeah, like it's a lot of times watching him can be challenging for me because yeah, like that phone call he got. I know all about that.
Well, and the thing too is that I'm so it's such a trip how when you it's very rare that I see characters on television that literally feel like I'm like, that's this person in my family, that's this person in my family, and be it not for their name, I would be like, get out that TV, because it was like literally like watching people that I'm related to. When I look at Ralph Angel's character, I see my brother. He's the baby, he's the only male child, and he still don't quite have his shit together. You know what I mean? He has two children and with the same, woman, and their relationships have gone through challenges, gone through ups and downs, highs and lows, everything in between. And he's also got a good heart. He's a great father. He's a great guy, but something just hasn't fully turned over for him to really be stabilized. And so on the show, looking at Nova and Charlie, like, Nick, could you just not always be about to lose the farm? Is that like every season? And so as a viewer, there's a part of me that's like, can't we just let them just have the land? Like, can that just be a thing, or is that constantly going to be will they, won't they, will they, won't they? It's like the land is its own character on the
Right.
show.
It
It's like
is.
when you watch shows, where there's like a romantic entanglement, you're like, will they end up together? Will they not end up together? What'll happen? That's the tug of war that's always happening with the land. So it's like if Ralph Angel's not fighting for Darla, he's fighting for the land. And so if Darla, he's got Darla, but then he's losing the land. And if he's got the land, he's losing Darla. It's kind of like, okay, so can we, I mean, I get it. And that's another reason why the show is so good, is because it is so rooted in reality.
Mhm.
It is rooted in the fact that this is a black man who's a former felon, only been out of prison for a handful of years, trying to get his life together, trying to maintain the legacy that his father built through this land, and also dealing with racial injustice, indiscrepancies with finances and all these other things. It's like, man, every time he comes on screen, I'm like, brother, you fine, but you sad all the time and you're so angry. And I'm so sorry. I just want to give you a hug. I just want to give you a hug. I just want to make it better for you, but I can't.
Listen, but I mean, when I think of my younger self, a black person in America, like I spent years and years of my life angry too. And it's a question of like how you channel that anger, because even in a lot of the political discourse that was happening over the past 4.5 years, a lot of people who were trying to find the silver lining, it's like, well, but in a way it's good because people are mad and that's causing them to do something, right? And so with Ralph Angel, we're seeing whether it's just the fact that he's angry and now ready to get active, or he also happens to have a big sister, Nova, who's well versed in advocacy. So we see that he's part of this lawsuit, for the farmers, and he's, trying to get the word out, because he knows that not only should he not be seeking this out alone because he's not the only person who was impacted, but he knows that he can't do it alone, right?
Right.
And that's growth too. Um,
Right.
but speaking of being influenced by Nova, and I'm not getting to her yet, but someone else who has been taking pages from Nova's book is young Micah, right? He and we saw that even in the depictions of the relationship between Micah and Nova. He was very interested in the different articles she was writing and things like that. And how he's, increasing in his own militancy and advocacy. He was protesting last season. And but one of the kind of plot twist ways that he's taking a page from Auntie Nova's book, and he may not even realize that this is a page from her book, but he's involved with the professor,
Mm-hmm.
which
Mm-hmm.
Auntie Nova has also done.
Yes, ma'am.
But,
Yes, ma'am. She had.
and I mean, of course, this is not a news story, and it's not, again, like this show is grounded in reality. So
Mm-hmm.
even, Little Fires Everywhere depicted a relationship of a professor being involved with a student. And it always calls into question, yes, technically, both of you are adults according to the law, but the power dynamics, not even just because she's a professor, right? It's even anytime you have like that May December romance, the older person has more life experience. They have been navigating with people longer, so they kind of know how to I'll say it, play different games that a younger person may not realize are games.
Mm-hmm.
What were how when you saw like the big reveal of who he was uh with, did anything come up?
Well, I will say honestly, I thought the big reveal was going to be a dude.
Me
That's just me.
too. I've been waiting
Because
for
and maybe that's because I believe the character in real life has the actor in real life has identified as queer. I thought the character was going to be a dude. And
okay.
I was going to be like, yes, like another queer character. Whoop. Again, another way he's aligning with Aunt Nova. I would say my initial reaction was like, okay, that's his teacher. That is his, and not just a professor, his professor. Because I think that's where the power dynamic really becomes significant, because it's one thing to be involved with a professor out of a faculty of 150 different professors on your campus versus your professor, because this person has an influence over your GPA. You know what I'm saying? They have a direct influence over your education versus you're a history major and you're dating a professor in the chemistry or science department. Not a big deal. Still a deal, but not a big deal. So I think it's interesting too. I go deep with it just because of the whole relationship between Charlie and Micah after the divorce. Was he was kind of like, I ain't fucking with you, mom. I don't really like you like that. So he flocked towards Nova as another female, powerful woman in his life. And then, of course, kind of started to mimic certain behaviors of hers, versus now him being involved with this woman who is a professor, who is a fair-skinned woman, who has certain
Oh yeah,
characteristics that might mimic his mother's personality.
absolutely.
I'm kind of like, you got mama issues. I mean, I know you do, brother,
I mean,
but you
we all
gonna date
do.
your mama. So yeah, so there's that. So yeah, those were some of my initial reactions when that reveal happened. And I was also just like, don't get distracted, bro. Just graduate, please. Just graduate.
Right,
Like,
especially because, in the Nova example, even in the Little Fires Everywhere example, for the student, sometimes for the professor, but typically for the student, it for them it's not a dalliance, right? They like fall deep in love. They start making life decisions based on this involvement. So yeah, like you said, it's like, please stay on track. You know, if if you can enjoy yourself in a way that is emotionally safe,
Mm-hmm.
okay.
Go for it. Right.
But yeah, please do not get derailed. And please, but of course it's easy to say this from the grown-up side, but it's like, please don't think that this is going to be your be all end all, bro.
I mean, even when Aunt Vi was like, I swear, there's so many times where I watch this show and I'm like, are you in my living room when I'm talking to my son recording our conversations? Because when Aunt Vi is like, oh, library, whatever, you just make sure you wrap it up. I literally said that to my son on Monday. So, like, okay, like these are actual conversations that I've had, no matter who it is,
Right.
but yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can agree. Yeah, otherwise, I mean, I would say Micah's not my favorite character on the show. My favorite character wavers between Charlie and Ralph Angel. I think Ralph Angel I have just like an affinity for because I'm like, I want to love you. I get it together. You're a good guy. And then Charlie, just because she was like the outcast because she has a different mother,
Right.
you know, but she's also like, but I run this hoe, so like y'all wouldn't even like have any of this if it weren't for my legal mind. So respect me. So I like her because
Okay,
of that too.
Charlie.
But yeah, Micah's like down on my list of characters. He's not my favorite character.
So he doesn't necessarily remind you of your son specifically.
I would say, hold on, I'm just gonna adjust. My leg is falling asleep. Don't mind me. I'm a yogi.
I,
I just quick. He reminds me of him in some of his foolish ways. Yeah, some of like the immaturity and things like that. It reminds me of him also like in some of his like I would say like semi-activist ways. Of course, I was like, why didn't you just go to Dillard? Like Dillard needs recognition too. Xavier is only for medical students technically. But anyway, no shade to Xavier. But when he was choosing a college, like that conversation about like choosing an HBCU, there's some, I would say, like parental interactions that remind me of interactions I've had with Seth, but personality wise, slightly different. I mean, there's similarities. Seth's an only child, Micah's an only child, parents are divorced and those kinds of things. So there's definitely similarities between real life and the character. But Micah strikes me as a little more impressionable than my son. Seth is definitely more like, I'm a leader. I'm going to go in my own direction.
nice.
Where Micah's like, who should I be? Am I black? What am I? It's no, that's not.
I think he might be a little more firmly rooted now,
Now.
earlier seasons.
Right.
Which is well, and then of course that's the other piece we don't know, like, was that interaction in the class their first interaction? Was that when her interest was piqued, or were they just keeping it coy in that interaction because they were already like doing what
I
they're
think it's the latter. I
okay.
think it's definitely the latter. I think they were already involved. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, that's what I took from it. I was like, oh, y'all been fucking okay. So you know what I'm saying? Like under the whole deception, discretion, you know what
Right.
I'm saying? Like conversation earlier.
I'm even thinking about some of the virtual classes I took last year. And there were a couple of times that I was in like virtual rooms and someone would say something interesting. And I was like, who are you? Hold on, let me zoom in.
Where are you from? Where do you hail from?
Right. So Auntie Nova, I actually don't, surprisingly, I don't have like a whole lot on her, but of course, once we start talking, I'm sure I could, things would come up. But really, when they were doing the recap of last season and, watching Calvin turn himself in and all that kind of stuff, it made me think about so in our interpersonal relationships,
Mm-hmm.
there are times where there can be a vast difference in the version of a person we know, like the person we're in relationship with, be it friendship, romantic relationship, what have you, and their reputation.
Right.
And there can be like this huge dissonance there, right? So we see that with Nova, because even as she's now like writing other articles, or even, the articles she was working on last year where she found out what his involvement was, and
Mm-hmm.
people, because the thing is, even if you're comfortable with the relationship you have, you being in a relationship with a person with that reputation or a negative reputation, it can call your own reputation into question, because you see people are looking at her like, but that was your man. So what are you really about? Because
And
like
that was your man. That
right,
wasn't like the dude that you just hooked up with. That was your dude
right,
from the beginning, and then you had a little break, and then you got back. Like he left, his whole marriage and all that. Man, that was a whole ass relationship. Y'all were living together. It was a whole thing. And I, as a viewer, always had an issue with that. I understand the conjunction that they created with that because it gives her character complexity. Not only is she queer, she's also an activist, she's a dark skinned woman, and she's dating a white dude and a cop.
right.
How complicated can we make her?
Who was
And I think
married and at the onset of their involvement, like
exactly.
actively married. He wasn't separated. He
No,
was
no, he
at
was
home with his wife
married
at night.
with
Yeah.
children,
Yes.
married with children while he's having a whole affair with the, I mean, and so I get like in the writer's room, they're like, yes, complicated character. I see that, and I can appreciate that from a creative standpoint. As far as her character being relatable, I felt like you doing a lot, Nova. Like it's the whole like right hand is doing one thing, left hand is doing something else, and they're not only just doing things that are in opposition, but actually in conflict with each other, which I guess again makes her character more interesting because it begs us to step into a place of like empathy or
Well,
compassion for
because I think,
her to say like,
right,
yeah,
because
like
so
I know she's been
often we associate like changes of mind, changes of life, changes of perspective with youth, but it can and absolutely does happen in adulthood. And even to the point about like the reputation of the people you associate yourself with, as long as I can remember, I have always been like in friendship with people who were not well liked, and sometimes I couldn't understand why they were well liked until I absolutely understood. Or other
you're
times,
like, oh,
like
yeah, you have no
I knew
friends.
what the story was or whatever, but
Mhm.
I initially played that like, well, they ain't never done that to me. So
Right.
um
Right.
and so yeah, but like, because even when we look at Nova, to your point about just her kind of trying to figure stuff out, and seeming like not to know what she's doing, that whole book tour, so she was dating Sterling K. Brown, and then she, not necessarily in this order, she had rekindled with her professor, um
Crease.
and then yes, and then the involvement with Reagan Gomez's character. And um so what I appreciate, even though, like as a viewer, it's easy to say like, girl, get it together. Like, why is your life so messy? That's real life. Like, there's no figuring it out. Like, it's an
Yeah.
ongoing
Yeah.
journey. Um,
Right.
and so while it's easy to judge her, I appreciate that they show like, no, this is more common than you would think, like, because we're all just trying to figure this life thing out.
Right. And I think, and I'm glad for that. I'm grateful for that perspective because I think that trying to put myself into the shoes of different characters is based on my lived experiences. And Charlie is a mother, Nova is not,
Right.
so the pressure sometimes to like get it together or figure it out often comes from stepping into the role of parenthood because you're so consciously aware of the fact that your behaviors are going to be mimicked essentially by someone else. Whereas when you're not a parent, there's almost a little more freedom to take your time in figuring it out for real. And parents often are like, okay, when's gonna be my time to figure it out? Because I really don't know what I'm doing, but I'm just trying to act like I know what I'm doing because this child is paying attention to me. And so yeah, no, so I can, and again, that's what I was saying. I think that it begs us to have compassion for her. Like, okay,
Right,
so this is natural, this is normal, this is
right.
happening in the lives of a lot of women. It just seems like there's so many things that are being placed onto her while she's also, Nova is doing her best to like stand on this platform of activism that says, I do have it all figured out. I
Mhm.
do know what all the issues
Right.
are of my people. I do know how to address them. And I'm like, girl, but you don't know who you are. So, like put
So
down the megaphone.
a-
So,
as a fellow fluidly queer, childless person, now mind you, career wise, no,
mhm.
job wise,
Job wise, okay.
while I have had chunks of time of like instability, particularly, you know, immediately following the last recession.
Hmm.
Um, in large part, I've had like job stability, um,
Hmm.
and I also identify as a creative. So also watching the show and seeing her get to engage and indulge in that is something I can appreciate. And also seeing her finally like really get to, because before she was trying to incorporate it into like the box of a work environment. So when she was able to publish this book and be recognized on her own, much in the way that Charlie, once she kind of stepped outside of Davis's shadow, she's able to, like fully develop as an individual entity. Um, and I mean, honestly, like with Ralph Angel, not
Hmm.
it's never our intention to be in our parents' shadow, but it happens, right? So
Right.
once the primary role of like male, man of the house was once that was his role, that
Hmm.
also served as a catalyst for him to come into himself, which is still a work in progress.
Right.
But that's also what we've been seeing with him. Um, and really look, Queen Sugar, a show about folks trying to figure this life thing out.
Pretty much.
Because even
Pretty much while being black
right,
in the South.
because even Aunt Vi, who is the matriarch, right?
Hmm.
I would, when you were talking about favorite characters, I might argue that even though one would assume that Nova would be my favorite character, I really love me some Aunt Vi. um and like with her, even we've seen her try to figure stuff out because she had to rebuild herself after her previous relationship, which we've kind of had a slow rollout of understanding what the
Hmm.
dynamics of that were. But she had to rebuild herself and her confidence to get to where she is now, not only as an individual but to find herself in a relation. Because it takes, I know people think like, oh, well, so it's the flip side of what we were talking about with the May December romance, when the person is barely out of childhood, right? When
Right.
you are like a mature adult, right? And you're dating someone who's well into adulthood,
Hmm.
um, that takes confidence because she knows how it looks, right? How it's perceived, how it's received. Um,
Right.
and it takes a confidence to do that, especially because as women, we tend to be judged more harshly for everything anyway.
Right.
Um, so, yeah. And, she was an employee when we met her. Now she's a business owner. She
Hmm.
was a girlfriend when we met her. Now she's a wife. And
Hmm.
that was something she thought she never wanted again.
Right.
Um,
Because of her experience in her previous marriage.
mm,
Right.
mm,
Right. Which I personally think that we haven't seen the last of her ex husband.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I think that's actually the person who the brown paper bag was being left with. That's who I think it
like
is.
a part of me, but I was like,
Because I'm like, who else would be in this raggedy ass motel that she would be? First, I was like, is it the white man who owns the whole town? No. And I'm like, it's not. She's not secretly delivering food to Charlie because Charlie's in
well, see, that's what I
California.
was saying. So it's
She's
someone
not.
she is providing care for, doesn't
That
want to
she doesn't
spend
want her
time with,
husband to know about. Doesn't want to spend time with. Providing care for. Doesn't want to spend time with or interact with,
or be seen with.
but or be seen with, but will go out of her way to deliver whatever's in the brown paper bag. I assume it's pies and cakes or whatever, but it could be anything. But again, this episode, I believe, was the theme of this episode was about deception. That was the theme. Keeping secrets. Charlie and Davis keeping secrets. Vi keeping secrets. Micah keeping secrets. Nova, well, she ain't really got no secrets. I mean, the secret was her source for the story. I guess maybe that was like the
Well,
first
even
secret. But
Hollywood, he's still very much in mourning about his mother.
of
And he
course,
was kind of keeping that a secret a little bit too.
like he's not sharing with
Vi.
Aunt Vi that he's
Because
still kind of
even remember,
grieving.
like she was trying to get a little frisky and he just
Oh,
really
right. He's
wasn't
like,
there.
nah, not tonight. I'm good.
And
Yeah,
for them, that's like but we also see that their dynamic allowed her to accept that gracefully. You know what I'm saying?
correct.
But
Without feeling rejected or something.
right.
Yeah,
But
right.
just from what we've seen of their dynamic, that is highly out of the ordinary.
Right. Which is interesting though, because that also speaks to that dynamic of the cougar, role of an older woman dating a younger man is the assumption that one of the foundations of their relationship is a highly sexually charged relationship.
Mhm.
Whereas in nature, so to speak, sometimes as a woman reaches a certain age, the sexual charge is not necessarily there the way that it would be for a younger woman. So that's interesting that they're introducing that, and also just introducing the fact that grief is real and grief is a process, and that Black men do grieve, especially when they lose their mother, if they've had any type of like positive interaction or relationship with their mother. So I think that's big. And I mean, I guess I don't know if it's ever been like officially stated what the age difference is between Vi and Hollywood. Is it
Well,
10 years? Is it 20 years?
I want
Like,
to say it's
did
like
she beat his
20-ish, but
mother?
the other part,
Like,
yes,
I
she
mean, mother's
and
age.
mother
Could she be
were
his
around
mother's
the same
age?
age.
Same
She
age.
might
Okay.
even have been slightly old, like a couple years older. But the other
Okay.
part I'm blurry on is when they met. They've been together for a long time. Was
Right.
he fresh out of childhood when they met? I don't think so.
I
I
don't know. And
I'm
also,
thinking
did he know her married to the man that was abusing her? Like, did he small town? It's a small town.
is
St.
he
Joe is a
from
small
there?
town. You know what I mean? Like, would he have known whatever the character's name is? I can't think of his name, but
Jimmy
Aunt
Dale.
Vi's ex-husband.
Jimmy Dale.
Would Hollywood have known, like, oh, that's that man who beats on her, da 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 da? Like, would he have known that? Because we don't really know the roots of their relationship, like you said, how they came together. We just know that they're together. Everybody knows there's an age difference. Don't nobody really talk about it. It just is what it is. But Aunt Vi stays on my shit list though, because she, as the actress, I think the actress is
Oh
phenomenal.
yeah, she's
She is
wonderful.
very active in the Black wellness space, which I really think is amazing. She's an advocate for self-care, like hoorah for her.
Yes.
Aunt Vi, she's a character I love to not like. And it's just because I get that she's like ride or die for her family, but she knows no boundaries. And I do not
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
I do not
Yeah.
like that at all. And while I know that it's coming from a protective, matriarchal place, it's obtrusive in so many ways where it's like, girl, sit down, especially the relationship with Blue. Like, mm-mm.
Well, because like motherhood means so many things, right? And I had opportunity to speak to this on an encouragement call that
Mhm.
uh I guess well, I provided the encouragement on the call,
Okay.
but it some of what I talked about is how, of course, we think of motherhood, we think of like giving birth to a child and raising them in your home. But it can
Mhm.
also be like, particularly women, but not limited to women. Um,
Mhm.
there is mothering that can happen in so many aspects of our lives. We mother our friends a lot of times. Sometimes
Right.
the ways in which we teach others can be a form of mothering. Um, and, other times it is the more literal, Vi didn't give birth to Blue, but she was a large part of his upbringing.
Mhm.
So and then, of course, the ways that she contributed to the raising of Charlie, Nova, and Ralph Angel, especially because Ralph Angel was quite young when their mother passed away.
Mhm.
And even the way that she mothers the community, the town, right? um Even now, at her diner, she has this formal pay what you can policy, but she's always operated in that way to an extent.
Mhm.
um and even when she couldn't have her business doors open, she still wanted to feed the people.
Right.
Again, like, she just has so much mother in her. But yeah, she definitely is boundaries challenged for sure.
For sure. And that's, I mean, that's another real life dynamic that I can relate to as a viewer, because my mother's relationship with my brother and his children mirrors in some ways, the relationship between, Ralph Angel and Aunt Vi and his child. Whereas, and there was some static at some point where my brother had to be like, "Mother, this is not your child. This is my child.
Right.
Thank you," and step aside. You know what I'm saying? So it's a touchy, a sensitive, I should say, dynamic that does exist. I think I think what rubs me the wrong way about Aunt Vi is that her love feels abrasive sometimes. You know what I mean? It's like, you gonna let me love you. And it's like, okay, I get, okay, stand back,
Right.
and feels very, it's I because we didn't get to spend a lot of time with, Daddy Board Alone, we didn't get to spend a lot of time with that character. I would only have to imagine that he was maybe gentler with his children, in a way, as far as like his relationship with them. And not to say that it was lacking in like firmness, but I would say like maybe he was just a gentler parental figure, whereas Aunt Vi seems to be more like
I
abrasive.
think that Vi was Ernest, Daddy Bordelon's big sister,
Big
also.
sister,
Mhm.
exactly. So it's the same kind of like dynamic as like Charlie to Ralph
Right,
Angel kind of vibe,
right,
Yeah. Yeah.
right. Um, the Yes, like, so, we talked about how kind of a theme of the show is the forgiveness piece. Also,
Mhm.
like, beginnings and endings, or, just the simultaneity, I'd even say, of beginnings and endings. Because even if you think about like Tarot, um, people see the death card, they freak out. But most readers will tell you that it's actually indicative of, the fact that cycles have to end for new cycles to begin. And so,
Right.
like how Daddy Bordelon's passing served as the
Mhm.
catalyst for everyone to come back together and,
Right.
create new dynamics. And even,
Mhm.
Darla, in her, her battles with addiction, she had to hit rock bottom more than once
Mhm.
to, and I wouldn't even say to come back to herself, because she was so young when all of that started. Like, there, and she has even asserted that the person she was before she was using and when she started using wasn't really her, because she was still trying to fit the mold her parents had created. So, she had to like end, you know, well, not just end the cycle of
Mhm.
using the various substances, but and those aspects of the dynamics with her parents, she had to learn to stand up for herself with her strong-willed mother, her
Mhm.
boundary challenged mother,
Right.
and even how we saw like Vi and Darla's mom, um,
Toe to
but
toe.
yeah,
Right.
um, another something that stood out to me, not necessarily like a huge plot line, but like that whole upbringing piece, right? So, this is set in Louisiana,
Mhm.
and pretty much everyone was born and raised and has lived there forever except for Charlie. Charlie was there in the summers.
Mhm.
Um, I don't readily recall where she said they went to college. Was it like Stanford? Might have been.
Somewhere in
Um,
California, I think that's how she ended up staying in California. I think it was
right.
like post
Especially
college.
because of his career.
Right, right,
But
right.
so, with her spending so much time in California, I don't remember if that's where they lived when she wasn't there in the summers.
Mhm.
But what I've gathered is that no matter where it wasn't necessarily the South. And then on
Right.
top of that, you add the dynamic that her primary parent was white. But even aside from that, as a person who was raised in California myself and now lives in the South, something, it's one of those little things, but it's like, when
Mhm.
you look at the ways that they all interact with Prosper, Ralph Angel calls him Mr. Prosper.
Mhm.
Nova calls him Mr. Prosper. Charlie calls him Prosper. Um,
Right.
when I'm and I see that dynamic in the interactions that I have here too,
Mhm.
because Southerners are very liberal with the sir, ma'am, miss, Mr. Me, not so much. That's not my default, I would say. Like
Mhm.
in some instances, I have started to incorporate it, but that's more of like
Mm.
um just like mimicking my environment rather than that being my default. So that was something where I was like,
Right.
because at first when I heard
Yeah.
Ralph Angel use it, I was like, oh well, he was the youngest, and that was his dad's, but no, he was all of their dad's homeboy, right? but
Yeah. Right.
um but then, because I knew that Charlie has always just called him Prosper, but then when I heard
Prosper. Right.
Nova,
Yeah.
when she was dropping him off and she said Mr. Prosper, I said, huh, look at
Mhm.
that. So, are you super liberal with the Mr., Miss, Ma'am?
No, not at all. I remember being a child and my dad trying to like implement this, like, well, you need to refer to me as sir and your mother as ma'am. And whenever you meet an adult, you have to call them Mr. So and so or Mrs. So and so. And like, even like making my friends refer to him as like Mr. Rains and my mom as Mrs. Rains. And my mom on the sideline would be like, you can call me mom, or you can call me Miss Daria, or you can call me Daria. It's fine. But he was like, trying to like stamp his, seniority in a way. But we're like, man, if first of all, if you ain't actually related to me, you're not an aunt or an uncle. Okay, we're not doing that either. Secondly, unless you introduce yourself to me as Mr. or Mrs. So and so, I will call you by your first name. I'm also a grown whole adult. And so the whole like seniority thing, no, oh, definitely not. And even now, like even in formal settings, when people introduce themselves, they tell me their first and last name. I'm going to call them by their first name. I'm
Right,
not going to call them Mr. So and so or Mrs. So and so.
right.
But yeah, it is, I would say it is more of a southern tradition. Some people would say people in California are just too liberal and disrespectful. So be it. I feel like that's something that's earned and it's not granted automatically. So I think that, yeah, I think it is a cultural difference. I think it's also people who demand that will more likely kind of experience that versus people who just kind of like let it be. Like if Prosper's character, sorry, loud person, if Prosper's character was like correcting Charlie,
Right.
that would be different. But because he still responds to her as would anybody else, it kind of seems like it's a little thing, but it's a thing that other people might not even picked up on. It's a nuanced kind of thing that other people might not even notice.
Right.
Yeah.
Especially something else that was different to me too when I came here is like when I think about the people that I ever did call Miss or Mr. So and so, I'm thinking teachers, right? And so it's like Miss or
Mhm.
Mr. last name. where I came to the South and it's Miss or Mr. first name, which I'm like,
First
you're
name.
still using their first name. So is it still the
Exactly.
honorific?
And
Like,
that's another reason why I'm like, this don't make no sense. Because
okay,
I even remember introducing myself to someone who was, I mean, here in California, but someone who's from the South, and their child was like, oh, they're like, oh, say hi to Miss Keyshawn. I was like, it's just Keyshawn.
right.
It's fine. Like, it's okay. It sounds weird when you put a miss in front of my first name. I don't like that. And again, and they're like, well, no, no, and I'm like, well, that's your child. But if I'm telling you not to call me that, maybe just respect my wishes as a grown up. But
Because even the aunt uncle thing for non-relatives. So when I grew up, it wasn't that any adult was aunt or uncle, but I had adult cousins who were aunt, uncle, so and so. And
same.
so I remember a few years ago, 2014. So I was already in my 30s, and the I was in a family gathering, and at one
Mm-hmm.
point, one of my cousin's children was saying, "Auntie, Auntie, Auntie," and I finally had, "Oh, that's me."
You're like, oh, okay, you're talking to
Talking
me.
to me.
Oh, okay.
Now,
I'm that now.
um, but as in the years in between, I have very much embraced my auntie-hood, and I actually am technically an auntie. My father has adult children, some of whom have adult children, so I'm actually a grand aunt at this point.
Mhm.
But now, like, again, I wouldn't necessarily want like a random kid at the community center calling me like aunt or uncle so and so.
Mm-mm. No,
Um,
no, no. And for me, it was like explaining like family tree to
right,
my son when he was younger and saying like, oh, well, Mima has, six brothers and sisters. So this is Uncle so and so, so and so and so and so. This is Auntie so and so. Whereas my dad just has one sibling. This is Uncle so and so. So if I'm referring to other people, he's like, well, whose brother are they? Because
right,
when we did the family tree, how do you have four uncles on your dad's side but he only has one sibling? Like, make
right,
it make sense.
right.
So yeah, and I also feel like I feel like it's a term of endearment
Yes.
versus a formal
Especially now,
title,
like even
especially
now,
now.
and I mean, and this might wind up happening with us as part of 40 plus YouTube. You will see the 20 somethings be like, yeah, auntie, da, 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 da.
Yeah,
But
auntie,
it's an
I know,
honorific. It's an
but
honorific.
it's at that point, yeah, exactly, yeah,
Yeah.
it is.
And then I guess kind of circling back to like what was actually in the story and what we were talking about with that, like looking at the show where it's, again, we're still in the thick of it, but it's depicting an earlier part of where we are in the pandemic, and they're at the very beginning of the vaccine rollout. um, and it's so interesting. Our country, of course, is unique in the fact that, like, we have, it's composed of all these states, and a lot of times the states feel like their own country in a lot of ways. And so looking at this show that reflects a place that I've never lived in, um, and how their rollout was being implemented, because I know here it was very much like tiers. So the watching this illustration of people of all different ages arguing about whether or not they were eligible, it was like, oh, that's right. The whole country didn't do it the same way necessarily. But I
No.
remember hearing a lot of people talk about folks coming from other parts of town to where the brown people were supposed to be being prioritized.
Mm-hmm.
So seeing that, it was like,
No, and it's not shocking, and that's where, as soon as this is, again, I'm telling you, I love the show. The
yes.
show is also very triggering.
Oh,
And so and every time I watch it, I'm like, I'm so glad I live in California. I'm so glad I live in California. I'm so glad. But then I'm like, wait, my son lives in Louisiana. Okay, triggered all over again. You
yes.
know what I mean? So it's when we get to the part of the episode of this week and, you see the rebel flags, you see, you know, people of the other persuasion, and you see them doing their Karen and, you know, bucking themselves up, taking up space in places where they don't belong. And it's like the same old story that we've seen so many times. And I recognize as a creator why it's necessary to tell these stories. It's not for us,
Right.
it's for them.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? It's for them. And I don't know how many of them are actually viewing the show and seeing themselves in it. You know what I mean? I don't know how many viewers of Queen Sugar are white. I don't know. I have never done the statistics. I am not with Nielsen's. I don't do the ratings. I don't know. But I do know that seeing that scene play out is like, I'm like, I could have written this shit myself. I already know where this is about to go. I already know where this is going.
Right.
And that's when I texted you, I was like, I'm mad. I'm mad now. Now I'm mad. Let's go ahead and talk about it. Right. So, yes, frustrated at the fact that, you know, just exerting the privilege as they always do in spaces like that. Also having like a shred, like this much empathy for the healthcare worker who's like, I'm here with my spouse and my kids, but I'm like, but you work in healthcare. You should
She
have
was
been at the
lying.
front
She
of
was
the
lying.
line.
She was lying like a
Girl,
mother.
you should have been at the front of the line.
Right.
You had all the vaccines already for your whole family. You got the first
your
batch.
job would have given it to you. They would have
given it to your whole family. They could have came to your house. Sit down, Karen. You and Chad and
That's
Billy.
why
and
she was shocked. Like, I
Are
first
you
of all,
telling me
I
no?
was surprised that he was as civil with Nova as he was at all.
Same. The
And
only reason why I thought he was civil is because I was like, he's about to do some sneaky shit.
right.
He's about to play it cool.
Well,
Like,
I
I'm
mean,
not gonna
even when
flare
she
up on
first
you.
walked up, even before she declined, because I will say, so I've been in Texas since 2008, right? So long before the election that, you know, change, well, all of them change our country, right? But, you know, y'all know which election I'm talking about.
The one where it's, where it the dog whistle election,
Right.
that one. Yeah.
So, but being here and then traveling, you know, in different parts of the South since I've been here, I'm no stranger to seeing rebel flags. And so, you know, when people talk about how that administration kind of made people so much more confident in showing and talking about how they truly feel, it wasn't different down here. It was pretty much the same. So, you know, even like I do have family who lives in Louisiana, and going there, you know, then you'll see, because like on a day-to-day, I'll just see kind of like what we saw in the car scenes, right? Like a bumper sticker here, a little hanging, just a little flag. But no, like I've been to Louisiana and seen the big old flag outside the front of the house type of thing. And then also during the immediate last election, you know, seeing a whole lot of Make America Great Again signs and you know, flags and everything. So but of course I wasn't in situations where I was mandated to interact with those people, right? Like I wasn't at an event where I had to walk up to them and have any sort of discourse. But you could tell on the wife's side, I'm not going to talk about the driver, but you know, for her it was like, a Black person just questioned me. She wasn't expecting that. She just knew. Well, and that's the thing, like the honor system is not necessarily something we can abide by anymore because people be lying. So she wasn't expecting to be questioned, period, let alone by this dark-skinned Black woman.
Correct.
This authoritative dark-skinned Black woman.
Right.
And my whole thing, well, maybe she is a healthcare worker, because I'm like, what you gonna do with some vials, bruh?
You got syringes at home? You gonna pick up? I mean, you could technically get syringes at CVS, but still, that's not the point.
Right.
The point is, what are you gonna do with the vials? How do you know how many? But at that point, it's like it wasn't even about the vaccination. It was just an act of rebellion. It's just he could have taken a whole box if that's the case. You know what I mean? He could have just swiped the whole thing or knocked it over, broke the glass, like just to be destructive. So I just, you know, I think for me, it's the reason why I find it And again, from a creative standpoint, I get it. But the reason why I find it problematic as a viewer is like, can we stop conceding? Can we stop like almost standing up for ourselves, but then receding back? Can we stop like almost standing up for ourselves and say, but let's call the police? Are you fucking kidding me? You just wrote an article saying you want to defund and now
Right.
you want to call them?
Right.
Girl,
Well,
again,
because
Nova, I gotta,
the whole thing though, and
this is where I, yeah, this is where I look at Nova like, girl, what is wrong with you? You just wrote an article less than 24 hours ago
well,
saying to defund the police
well,
in
see,
the,
with the whole thing, and without getting like deep into the like the political piece,
yeah,
but so many times, and I think that's where the conversation about defunding the police got so muddy, is because defund the police and abolish the police are not the same sentiment, but a lot of people equate the two.
true.
Um, and the thing too, like even when the law enforcement came, it goes back to what we were talking about culture and respect, because the law enforcement addressed the older Black woman as Miss So and so, right? But still treated Prosper like, with no respect.
I think
Not,
that was two different cops.
still, well, I'm just saying.
But still, in general, like it's like the older cop knew her, and I feel like the younger cop did not because I don't know, maybe it was the same cop, but I have to watch it again. But I
I
feel
think
like,
they
but
were.
yes, to your point, I thought it was two different guys. It was like one guy was over handling over here, and the other guy was handling over there. And again, and this is me in my TV mind. The very beginning of the episode was interaction with Prosper and Ralph Angel, and Prosper's just saying like he's giving him his flowers, he's affirming him, and they're having like a whole like fathery son-ish moment where he's expressing his pride and yada yada yada. As soon as I saw that scene, I was like, Prosper gonna die.
Yeah.
This is it. That's just me. That's what I saw. And I'm not projecting. I have not seen the next episode. This is not a spoiler. This is just
Right.
an idea. Okay.
Or
I was
like,
like,
if nothing else, something is going.
something is going to happen. And because the man is aging, because he already had, some known health issues on top of this virus, should he go into the hospital for treatment for an emergency, it's possible he could be more exposed than ever before, like all the other factors. And then again, me just viewing as a viewer who watches a lot of television, I'm like, this moment is substantial. By the end of this episode, this man's either going to be dead or on his way to not being alive anymore.
Mhm.
And also because that would remove another paternal character from these three children, the
Right.
Bordelons, because
Right.
then all they have is Aunt Vi at
Well,
that point.
because too, like the dynamic with Ralph Angel and Hollywood,
It's more
it's right,
brotherly. It's
because
not
yeah, it's
father.
like
Yeah.
technically uncle, but um uh not realistic. I can't think of the word I want right there. So it's like technically uncle, but the dynamic is more big brother.
Correct.
Um,
Yeah.
but in lieu of someone from a parental generation, that would be like the next, I guess, highest level man in his life.
Kind of, yeah, kind of. But then the connection between Prosper and Daddy Bordelon, that was his boy. You know what I mean? They came up together, so to speak. They became men together. Whereas Hollywood is might be like 5 years older than Ralph Angel, to be honest. I don't know. Again, I don't know what the dynamic is age
Right.
wise between them, but I also just think that they had to have a character that was eliminated by a cop to really like drive the nail in deeper as far as the injustice of police against Black people. Like they had to have that. And I thought it was going to be Micah. And I was like, oh my God, but he's still here, which is fine. You know what I'm saying? Because I think that
But
would kill Charlie if they killed Micah.
and
That
I
would,
was gonna say, plus, I think that would be hugely triggering for you, because I remember even when we
yeah.
were watching last season, not together, but like when we would talk about it afterward, when you got to um It might not have been last season, but just some of the
I think it
times
was
when
last
Micah
season.
has
Yeah.
gone through hard times, you were like, "Woo, I
Yeah, it
was
was.
not
I think it was a
prepared."
Say Their Names episode. It was the episode where they talked about George Floyd and they're showing the reactions of the men, which was brilliant,
Hmm.
brilliant writing, because I think that that was reflective of reality. I have a brother, I have a son, I have a father, I have a brother-in-law, I have a lot of black uncles, black men in my life that like them talking about George Floyd was a completely different experience versus any black woman I talked to talking about that because they saw themselves.
Right.
They saw themselves, no question. And so, yeah, last season, that episode was super, it was triggering and also like angering in so many different ways. So in a sense, yes, I'm glad. Like let Micah live, let the boy win, let him graduate from college. Please don't get this old lady pregnant. Let's do that. Okay. Like, let's do that. If somebody has to go, let it be the older man at the later stage in his life, but still terrible. So, I think what we saw in the final scene of this episode was something that again is going to enrage the viewers, the
Mhm.
black viewers in particular. And I'm curious. I mean, I didn't watch like a coming next, what's happening in the next episode. I rarely watch those because I really want to kind of be like surprised.
Right.
And so I think that leaving it kind of at this like cliffhanging moment, um, we don't need another death. Like I mean,
Well, but even going back to what I
to
said
what you were saying
earlier,
earlier though.
yeah, like that ending to begin again, or
Right.
even if this if if the show is going to be a sandwich and this is the last season,
Right.
the show started with the death of the patriarch.
True.
So um I guess something else, like just a food for thought, not necessarily like a whole conversation piece, is we skipped over their quarantine for the most part, but as we know from real life, people spending more time at home, spending more time alone, spending more time with each other, spending more time with their thoughts, also caused a lot of people to have accelerated development, accelerated realizations.
Mm-hmm.
So it'll be interesting to see because, you know, based on some of the cues, like, okay, vaccine rollout, we're looking at February, March. Um, Darla, not super clear how pregnant she is, but she's big pregnant. So
Mm-hmm.
7, 8, 9 months
Mm-hmm.
um pregnant. So 6 to 8 months have passed since we last saw them. So
Mm-hmm.
it'll be interesting to see how all of those like internal revelations that likely happened, because
Mm-hmm.
they didn't really, aside from the mention of her involvement with Calvin, we don't really know what Nova's post, what her time since his arrest like has been like for her internally. So that'll be interesting. Are there things that you're kind of looking forward to seeing, or questions that you're looking forward to having answered?
I want to. I like the idea that they sent Blue away for opportunity
Right.
and in some ways protection, also because of everything that's going on. So I want to see like if they're gonna do like he comes home from the summer, or like if there's gonna be any times where we see him again, like there, like actually in St. Joe. I, of course, want to know who Aunt Vi is delivering paper bags to, want to know what's happening with that. The passage of time, the only thing that I thought about too, in addition to what you mentioned, as far as us kind of having a concept of where they are time wise, was when Ralph Angel was at the payday loan place. The guy said, "You've gotten a loan for every month for the past 4 months," or something like that. So
Mhm.
that kind of let me know, like, it's been at least that long that you've kind of been in this hole. Of
Oh, and
course,
that's
like I was,
this season too.
yeah, right, harvest season, exactly, which is like fallish, spring. I mean, late, yeah, harvest time is like in the fall. Um, I would think I want to know, like I mentioned earlier, like, are they going to just keep the land? Like, for me, that's, I guess that's like the most significant part. The relationship stuff is entertaining and it's intriguing, but them being able to maintain their family legacy through this land is really like the thing that would make me feel like if this show ends and the Borderlones lose their land, I'm gonna be mad.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be mad at Owen. I'm gonna be mad at the show. I'm gonna be writing letters to Ava like, can we get a motherfucking win, please? You know what I'm saying? Because the way I see it is, if everything else goes to shit and they have their land, they could just all live on their land. You know what I mean? And if nobody ever became a politician and everybody got back together with their exes or whatever happened, like, this is a safe space for them to exist. So I would love to see that. Davis and Charlie, I don't really want them to get back together. That for me is anticlimactic in a lot of ways, for people to go back to toxic relationships, even if they were quote unquote high, college sweethearts. Their son is a whole adult now. And if they get back together, they might try to have another baby. And we don't need that. That's just not, please don't do that. Nova, I would love it if she would partner with another Black person. Well, that would be great. Be they male or female, really don't care. I would like that, for her. I'd say Aunt Vi and Hollywood. Um, I like them together. Like Aunt Vi is tolerable because of Hollywood. That's the only reason why I'm like, okay, cool, you could come over because you're gonna bring your husband and he's fun. But like otherwise, I yeah, I'm curious to know how they're gonna tie it up with the bow,
Right.
or if they're going to do what a lot of shows do, which is kind of leave us to hope that everything worked out for them, as opposed to just leaving us on a cliffhanger wondering how
Right.
things, came together. It's also interesting. Of course, they're probably almost done with filming at this point, but the fact that Louisiana is experiencing another hurricane is
Right.
really interesting. So I was like, oh, I wonder if they're going to have time to kind of sprinkle some hurricane stuff in, but maybe not. So we'll
Right.
see. But that's another like possibility, I would say, that things that I
Valid.
would like to see from the show.
Right.
How about you? What are your hopes and your wants?
Um, so this one I'll say is not necessarily about Nova herself, but just in general. I am very tired of queer stories that end up with a straight ending. So um I would I'd be pleased if Nova wound up with a woman. Or well, I was gonna say they not ready for this, or even
A
a
Polly, maybe she could. Yeah,
oh yeah, a poly relationship. I don't know if she's really. I don't know. She does seem pretty set
she
on
seems pretty
monogamous
monogamous.
relationships, though.
Agreed. Yeah, agreed.
Um, I want another person. So they haven't zoomed in on it in a while, but remember, Aunt Vi has lupus. Um, it seems to be under control. I hope
Right.
that continues to be the case. Um, I know, I know we're not supposed to like go outside of the frame of the show, but like I know the actor who plays Blue, like, is officially off the show, but I would love for like at least a cameo, at least in the last
At the
episode.
last, yeah, even at the end or when the baby's born or
Yeah.
something, he shows up.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
right.
Um, I I did make the mistake of watching the, coming up.
Oh,
Unfortunately for me, it wasn't a coming up next week. It was coming up this season. I was like, damn it.
oh, it's like too far ahead.
Um, because even when I was trying to figure out how many episodes were going to be in the season, and I was trying to like just scroll to right where the information was, and like no, don't see, don't give me any hints.
Right, right, right.
um, but like I know that like a happy ending might be, just unrealistic to expect. But yeah, I would like it, because obviously the story is not going to span 10 years in 10 episodes, but I would like to feel some sense of closure, may not be the right word, but just tie it up enough where I'm not like, what happened? What happened? Like, I
We don't
pretty
need like a Sopranos ending. We don't need like a, like the infamous black screen. Like, I don't think that would happen. But yeah, I feel you. It's like I don't necessarily need it to be a Disney ending, of
Right.
course. It doesn't even have to be, like you said, a happy ending, but just something that feels complete.
Yes.
Like one of my shows that I love was Schitt's Creek, and they finished in 6 seasons as well. Of course, totally different show. But the final episode was like a scene. Like there's nothing else I needed. This
Right.
gave me everything I needed. I'm happy with you doing whatever you do, imaginary characters, you know? So for Queen Sugar, it feels like because it's a black show, you know, we just want it to just end good. You know what I mean? We don't want them to leave anything. We want you to just leave it all on the floor, on the land, and the sugar cane is fine too. But just leave it all out there. When we're done, I want to be like, goodbye.
Well, and then okay, we're supposed to be wrapping up, but
We're getting there. Yeah.
speaking of Harvest, though,
Mm-hmm.
before she became a politician, Charlie had bought the primary like cane plant in town. So if she is diving deeper into the political waters, what's going to happen with that?
Right.
So we'll need that answered too.
Yeah.
Because
Good
she
one.
still lives there,
She
right?
still lives there. And yeah, and the other the half sibling, the sister, the daughter of the white
Ooh,
man.
the fine one
We're gonna see the fine
from How
one
to Get
from
Away with Murder.
How to Get Away with Murder.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am. When I saw her, I was like, oh, I know you from another show. So yeah,
Yes, bring
we're
her
gonna see
back.
her again.
Yeah, see, that was the thing too, like just in terms of realism, right? The people with access and privilege who were able to protect themselves. Because even when Texas had our winter storm, you know, we had that infamous politician who fled to Mexico with his family while the rest of us were freezing in the
To death
dark.
or
Yes,
damn
with
near in
no
the dark.
water.
Yeah, filled with water, filled with freezing cold water.
Right.
Meanwhile, yeah, somebody's putting a lime on the coconut and doing other things like just, yeah.
So, well, friend, thank you so much. Looking forward to continuing next week.
Same. This is great. This is good. I know people watch this are going to be like, okay, so this is way more than a recap.
Yes,
Great. Good.
it's a reflection.
It's a reflection.
The show
Exactly.
was just a catalyst.
Literally, as good television should be, thought provoking. Yes, this is great. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, dear viewer, please, what is it? Like, comment, subscribe, share. And we will be here next week, round about this time.
Awesome. All right. Peace, y'all.
Bye.